I didn't read enough nonfiction last year. Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to my top 10 list of my favorite nonfiction reads of 2024. And as I said in the beginning, I found that my nonfiction reading has actually been somehow going down over the last couple of years, which is odd since I write, read, love nonfiction. And so in 2025, I don't really make resolutions, but I'm going to try to be more consciously reading nonfiction. Nevertheless, I did read some, I think 25, maybe 30 nonfiction titles last year, and I've developed a top 10 list, and so that's what we're going to do here. By the way, this video should probably be much shorter than my top 10 fiction novels list, which I published on New Year's Eve. So here we go. At number 10, I have Cultish by Amanda Montell. This book is not perfect, and not every part of it I thought worked as well. But I thought Montell did a great job of kind of breaking down kind of how cults work, and particularly how cults use language. Really similar language to create this sense of inclusivity, to create this sense of people who are in the know and people who aren't, to create the sense of pressure, to keep people involved through the language and the words they use. And she applies this to everything from what we would think of as traditional cults to political parties, but also just like multi-level marketing, fitness organizations and fitness clubs and things like that. And I thought it was really interesting, if somewhat imperfect. And so I put it on my list at number 10. At number 9, I have The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is the second Coates book that I've read, and it is a collection essentially of 3 essays that Coates wrote at various kind of points in his life based on different experiences. He wrote part of it based on his experience in going to Senegal and kind of going through the process that he says a lot of Black Americans go through of visiting places associated with the international slave trade and slavery, and the beginning of the middle, or the launching point for the Middle Passage, and his reflection on those thoughts there. He goes to an attempt to ban one of his books is taking place, and he kind of writes about what that's like and experience, and kind of the librarian and other warriors who are out there fighting to keep books accessible to students, and he just kind of generally then writes about issues revolving around the way in which he expresses his thoughts in words, the way in which words carry weight and bring about potential change and reflect the nature of the writer. And it really is, I think, a really good meditation on language and how language affects action or affects change, and how we use language to express our ideas and in ways which might then have some impact on others. And I thought it was a really good essay collection. At number 8, I have Henry V by Dan Jones. This is my first book by Dan Jones, who is kind of a popular historian. That's not to say he isn't an academic. And I enjoyed Henry V a lot. I wanted to read this in part because Henry V is my favorite Shakespeare play. And so Henry V and the Battle of Agincourt and the 100 Years' War has always been one of those topics that, as a lover of history, has appealed to me. And I thought Dan Jones really nailed it here in this biography of Henry V. It's not hagiography. It, I think, fairly well balances an appreciation for the achievements, the uniqueness of Henry V and what he was able to do, with some, really honest looks into what he was like, and how he came to believe on a religious level that he had the right to do the things he did in France, and why he carried out what they would be war crimes and atrocities, and how cold-heartedly he could deal with people who were involved in acts of heresy. And I think it presents a really good portrait of Henry V and puts him in his place in terms of the history of England and his relation with France, etc. And I really, really enjoyed it. And so for that reason, it's on my list here at number 8. At number 7, I have Black AF History by Michael Harriot. This is a book which essentially, in some ways, attempts to refocus American history on the contributions and achievements of Black people in American history, against all the odds and the prejudices and the barriers put up and the violence put up against them, to kind of reframe American history from a black point of view. It is funny. It is irreverent. The language used in it can definitely sets it off apart from a work of academic history, but it's one of those things I liked. I made a video about this book about revisionist history, which, when you say revisionist history, people go, oh goodness, that's terrible. We shouldn't have revisionist history. All history is revisionist history. Dan Jones's Henry V is a revisionist history of Henry V. Other books about Henry V have been written. If Dan Jones was going to say the exact same things they said, he wouldn't have bothered to write. And so, the idea that revisionist history is something that's bad, I think, is utterly ridiculous. But I do think you have to go into it knowing what it is and approaching it. So approaching with a certain amount of skepticism, but not with a closed mind. At number 6, I have a biography of John Lewis, A Life by David Greenberg. John Lewis, one of my personal heroes, hero of the civil rights movement, just an extraordinarily important person. Of the big civil rights leaders, I think, of the 1960s, everybody would mention Martin Luther King Jr. Many people would mention Malcolm X. Lots of people would talk about Fred Hampton and people like that now. And John Lewis was right there and knew all of them, and at an incredibly young age participated in most of the major civil rights events of the early 1960s, and then went on to have a career as a United States congressman and to become an author, and just an incredibly extraordinary person, not a perfect person. And I think Greenberg does a fairly good job of at least introducing the ideas of his flaws and his weaknesses and things like that, and what is overall, I think, a biography intended to celebrate the life of an important and extraordinary person. Number 5, I have the 100 Years' War on Palestine by Rashid Khalidi. This book really introduced me to some ideas and some history and some thoughts that I hadn't had before, and in lots of ways caused me to reassess, retrench my stance on issues involving Israel and Palestine, particularly in the wake of the October 7th attacks from more than a year ago now. For that reason, I think the book is extraordinary. Lots of people, when I made this video, which starts off saying I was wrong, and then goes into why I thought Khalidi's book was so important to me as a book to read, to cause me to kind of reassess and retrench my positions on that. A lot of people pointed out that Khalidi is biased. They tell me all kinds of things about Khalidi, and that's fine. I didn't go into it thinking that Khalidi was going to be an absolute truth teller and have no biases. I don't think that about anything I read. I don't think that about any work of history or politics or philosophy that I read. It's just not how I approach things. I have a level of skepticism, which I work hard to prevent from becoming cynicism. But it did reframe things for me in ways which caused me to question things that I'd said and believed before. And I thought it was really powerful. And for a relatively short book, I thought it was incredibly informative and important. At number 4 on my list, I have Down by the Riverside, a South Carolina slave community by historian Charles Joyner, who's the father of BookTube's own Hannah Joyner from Hannah's Books. This is just a foundational work of American history as we're talking about in terms of the history of slavery in the United States. A lot of the things that I read in Down by the Riverside about slavery, and particularly a community of enslaved people working primarily on rice plantations in coastal South Carolina, a lot of that information is stuff that I never knew where it came from. And so on top of kind of, I think, looking at and giving a really realistic view of how slavery worked and enslavement worked, it also gives a really rich kind of history of the culture of the enslaved people in this community. As I said, it is a foundational work of American history in terms of research into slavery and the lives of the enslaved people and how slavery worked for them and how slavery treated them. And I think it's just really extraordinary in all kinds of ways. And I think if you're interested in any aspect of how slavery worked in the United States and how different slavery worked in different places, I think this is just an essential read. At number 3, I have Thunderclap, a memoir of art, life, and sudden death by Laura Cummings, which focuses on the life of a specific Dutch artist named Fabrizi, the guy who painted the Goldfinch, which is the painting that features in Don Tartt's book by the same name. And it goes way beyond that. It is as the name implies, it's kind of a memoir of Laura Cummings' own developing artistic taste. It is a history, an explanation, and a attempt to kind of promote and resurrect, I think, the idea of Dutch art during the Renaissance period. And it comes with beautiful reproductions of art, forcing you to reassess your ideas about Rembrandt and other of the Dutch masters or the Northern Renaissance masters. I just thought it was a really, really good book, combining the story of this one artist and his work, and using that to kind of show how the apprentice system of artists worked, and how art in the Dutch Renaissance or the Dutch painters was developed, and their style and the subject matter and all those kinds of things in a way which was incredibly informative and really enjoyable to read. At number 2 on my list, I have Ninth Street Women by Mary Gabriel. This is another book about art, but very different artists. This is a book about the women who were at the forefront of the abstract expressionist movement. Sometimes they might be married to abstract expressionists, like Elaine de Kooning was married to William de Kooning, more famous abstract expressionist art, or Helen Frankenthaler, or these other abstract expressionist women. And this book kind of tells their story, taking each artist as they come chronologically in kind of the history of the abstract expressionist movement, talking about the development of their work, talking about their success, their ability to get gallery shows, their critical acceptance, the sacrifices they had to make, the lives they lived, oftentimes made more painful by the men, the artists they were associated with, thinking of Lee Krasner and Jackson Pollock here. And just, I thought, it were incredibly important work of history, putting these women at the forefront where they belonged of the abstract expressionist movement. There was, I think, a tendency to dismiss them by many people who didn't know them and weren't familiar with their work as just, kind of girlfriends and wives of these artists who were hangers-on and who got shows because of who they were connected to. And nothing could be further from the truth. Just kind of an extraordinary work of history, which I liked a lot. And that brings me to number 1, South to America by Imani Perry. This book is similar in ways to Black AF History by Michael Harriot, in that it attempts to kind of explore the history of racism and its impact on the South and on America and the United States of America in general. And in doing so, it tells the stories of people who were Black people who were innovators, and of ways in which Black culture filters into mainstream American culture. And at the same time, it tells the story of how racism, discrimination were put in place and became an entrenched part of life in the South, and remains so today. And what Perry does is she travels from state to state throughout the South, and she goes to most of the 11 states which would have been made up the Confederacy in 1861, and she tells stories about people who were there. It's really focused on her family when it comes to Alabama, where she had heritage and had spent a great deal of time. And it just really is a powerful book, which I think is very evocative of the experience over decades, if not centuries, of Black people in the South, and how that racism and that entrenched racism became such an important part of Southern society and Southern culture and the Southern way of life in a negative way, which then spilled out onto the rest of the United States over history. And I thought it was really good, and Imani Perry is a great writer. There you go. There are my top 10 nonfiction reads of 2024. One of the things that occurred to me when I was talking about this is you can kind of tell what my interests were this year by the titles or the subject of the books that I read. If you've read any of these, have any thoughts about these, have any arguments to make, please leave those in the comment section down below. And as always, thank you for watching.